Hey everybody, my apologies for the terrible video and audio quality I am subjecting you to with this message, but I wanted to let everybody know that within hours of us filming this week's episode, we got the news that The Acolyte was not going to be renewed for a second season. Zach and I both agree that this topic deserves essentially its entire episode, and that will be what comes out next week. You'll get all of our thoughts on this whole development of the show not being renewed. If you are upset about it, the only positive thing that I can really say is that the stories that you love are still there. They're not going to go away. They're still going to be present. And what it meant to you isn't going to change. That can't be taken away by anybody. But for now, we've got a very positive, hopeful, and deep discussion today about the Clone Wars turning 16, as well as what Star Wars means to each of us and what we think defines it best. So we'll get into all the Acolyte news next week, but for now, enjoy this week's episode.
The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast.
Hello there, and welcome to The Force of Others. I'm Matt Beutner.
I'm Zachary Owen Turner. I'm here to save you.
What? Okay. For those at home, Zach was like, I got this really great Clone Wars intro planned. And then as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors, we have our first full episode show guest. We have Lance Christopher Candler on the show today. Hi, man.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Great.
We are great. Very, very excited to talk to you and to talk about the Clone Wars. For those listening at home, I have known Zach since 2011. I have known Lance since I was 5, which would equate to...
Don't age yourself, Matt. Don't age yourself.
That's fine. Let's steer into the skid. 1994?
1994.
And I was born in 93, so that's fun.
Okay, thanks. All
excellent,
right. Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, well, before we even talk about anything else, just we did the video of Zach and my fun, like, early Star Wars fan picture. Lance and I have 2 notable Star Wars pictures that we put up on social media a while ago. In 2005, Lance and I saw Revenge of the Sith at the midnight showing.
Wow.
And 10 years later, we saw The Force Awakens at the midnight showing.
I remember that.
Which I think,
Normie.
and that was the last time I waited outside the theater for a midnight showing, right?
That was the last
Well,
time
it's
I was
'cause,
at that theater.
2008, or was it 2000? I don't know. Well, they stopped doing midnight showings for a while because of
Because
gun
of the
violence.
well, yeah, we don't even have to talk about everything that happened with The Dark Knight. But anywho, but yeah, we don't have to bring up the sad memories.
Sorry.
It was a terrible thing that happened. No, it's fine. But the point is, we've been friends for a long time. So anywho, but yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. We got a good show. We're going to interview Lance. We're going to find out who he is as a Star Wars person. And then we're also going to talk about how, speaking of aging and time passing, the Clone Wars film and the Clone Wars show turned 16 this year. Last week, the Clone Wars movie turned 16 years old. It can drive now.
Wow.
That makes us old.
Yeah.
1994, nah. The Clone Wars being 16 years old, that's, there it is, right in the mortality.
Well, the 90s was like 10 years ago, so it's fine.
What is it that, like, if Back to the Future was made now, Marty McFly would go back to... Would he go back to 94?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll act like we planned that. The year Lance and I met, that's when Marty McFly would go back in time. Okay, so anyway, before I go into anything else, Zach, how's your week been? How did Star Wars find you this week?
Good. You know, it's been not a lot of news this week, but here and there we got some Outlaws footage, which I'm very excited for. I'm going to pre-order that this week so that hopefully, maybe not our next show because it comes out on the 31st or the 30th, but if you pre-order, you get it 3 days earlier. So the day after we record our next show, I will I will be sitting down to play that. We got a look about all the different worlds, and we're going back to Tatooine and a couple of new worlds, which is super exciting. I think it's super cool to finally have an open world game. Not that Jedi Fallen Order isn't, but it's not truly. Like, it's kind of map-based, but they say that this is going to be a completely open world and a character that you'll be able to, like, choose which way you want to go, kind of like Knights of the Old Republic. So I'm pretty excited about that. That's been my Star Wars week.
Right on. Yeah, we talked about it on the first episode. I might eventually be able to justify the $500 it'll be to get a PlayStation 5, but not yet. I'm going to be a good, responsible adult, and instead of putting money, I'll put time into my nerdiness with this Star Wars podcast. But Lance, how was your week? How did Star Wars find you this week, if it did?
Good. It did. I had a super Star Wars week. So,
Nice.
So I just had a baby, so I'm kind of taking some time off of work, and so I didn't have the baby, but I was
Say, wow.
yeah, I was present for the baby having. But so we're all just kind of hanging out at the house right now. So I did a sequel trilogy rewatch.
Wow.
Ooh.
Yeah, with the 2-year-old.
Wow.
Ooh.
So
Is
it
that her
was,
first introduction?
Yeah. So she hasn't really been Star Wars ready yet, and arguably is currently not Star Wars ready. But I was watching it; she was interested, so she sat there. So we started off with that, which was a lot of fun, and then I am playing Jedi Survivor right now. For the
Oh,
first time.
so good.
Cool.
Yeah.
You congratulations.
You said
You're
it's for
ahead
the
of
first
me.
time?
It's my first time, yeah. So I played Fallen Order when it came out and loved it. But then life, gets in the way of everything, and so I never played Survivor until now. I'm also horrifically bad at video games, and so
They have an
it takes
easy
me
setting.
Yeah. No, I'm on the easy setting, and I'm falling off of everything. But that's just my life. So I'm trudging along through that game right now.
Well, my spoiler for you is that game made me cry.
Oh. I
Yeah.
thought you were about to straight up spoil something in the game.
No,
That's
no,
like,
no, no.
Wow, man.
No. That
Also,
game
the
made me
butler
like
did it.
cry.
Yeah. Cool.
Well,
Yeah, well-
I'll finish it then.
Nice.
What about
No,
you,
I
Matt?
remember. I actually didn't have that much of a Star Wars week. I had a busy work week. I know, failure. Host of a Star Wars podcast. I think I did the least amount of Star Wars things. But I will comment on Lance and my video game struggles. I remember when Battlefront 2 came out, Lance and I talked about it, and he kept saying, yeah, I keep dying every time I'm supposed to fly a ship because I'm flying into everything. And I was like, oh, it can't be that hard. And then I played, and I was like, oh, yep, me too.
Yeah, I turned it off. I've never beat that game because if they put you in a spaceship, that's the end. I just turned the game off.
I bought the spaceship game that they came out with, and same thing. I was like, I got maybe three arcs in, and then I was like, I can't do this. It's so hard. I want to be a fighter pilot, but I can't.
I wanted to play Squadron so badly, but it just looked like I would fail a lot.
It was
so
hard.
I didn't get it. Yeah.
Well, and you would think for the amount of hours I spent on Star Wars Pod Racer,
Oh, yeah.
on Nintendo 64, that some of those skills would transfer over, but they zero transfer over. So.
Speaking of Pod Racer, I downloaded the remastered version and finally got to beat it as an adult, which was an achievement that I didn't do as a kid. And I had like a 15, 16, maybe even 20-year like victory of being like, I did it!
Well,
This is
it's
for
good.
you.
It's good to have goals.
Right.
Yeah, we're talking about we're losing our nerd cred because I also downloaded Star Wars Pod Racer, and still there were things I didn't.
Well, there's
beat.
a boost mechanic that they don't tell you about.
Well, you're talking about when you.
There's
Well,
a way
wait,
to
explain.
boost. You can like there's a mechanic for it.
That was it. That's how you do it.
All right.
There's like when your bar gets up, you can press I think the joystick forward and X or something like that, and it will literally give you a boost, and it changed the game for me.
Oh,
It made it way
then this-
easier.
Then this is depressing because I definitely know about the boost mechanic, and I still have not beaten some of the races.
Every
in that
opportunity
game.
to lie just then.
That's not what this is about. Eventually, we'll have a competitive. Can you race each other in Episode 1 Racer?
I think we can if you have it on the PlayStation. So maybe we'll film that for the podcast.
Not this week,
No,
but we
no.
will eventually. You can see how bad we are. But anyway, so those were our weeks, and now let's dive into the Star Wars. Like we've said before, and like you hopefully listened to last week with Kai, with our first on-air interview. This podcast is all about getting to know others' perspectives, where they are as fans, what they like, so on and so forth. And so, Lance, we're going to dive into the rapid-fire interview portion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I know the answer to this first question, but I might be wrong.
I don't.
So, Lance, where were you when you first saw Star Wars, or what is your first Star Wars memory?
So I was really glad that y'all were going to ask this because this is a very vivid memory for me.
Oh.
Do you remember, I'm going to name drop, do you remember Jonathan Fisher? We went to school with him. Okay. So neither will anybody else, but he left the state a long time ago. But so I used to go over to his house all the time to play. And he introduced me to a ton of great movies because he had this huge movie collection. And so when the Star Wars box set came out, I want to say it was in 95, that has all the heads, like the half masks.
Mm-hmm.
He got that, and so he dragged out the little bitty TV, like the 10-inch screen TV with the VCR on the bottom of it with the extension cord.
Yeah.
And we laid in the kitchen floor, like 3 inches from the screen, and we watched A New Hope, and it was mind-blowing to me. And so I didn't have enough time to watch the other ones. I had to go home because I was, 5, 6. And so I just begged and begged my dad to take me to rent Empire Strikes Back because I had to know what happened next. And so finally he took me to Payless Video.
Wow.
Which is an old sentence to say. And we looked and they didn't have Empire there. It was all checked out. But they had Jedi. And so my dad was like, well, just get this one. And so I rented Jedi and went home and watched it without having ever seen Empire and had absolutely no idea what was going on. And so after, I won't say temper tantrums, but after some internal conflict over that, I ended up with my own box set, which I still have today, of the 3 VHSs. So I absolutely wore those out when I was kindergarten, first grade, sometime around then.
Man, what a jump. Be like, yeah, Luke blew up the Death Star. He has a lightsaber. Who is this Greek? What?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so, and you found
He's
out.
his dad?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no. Now, the good news is that I was very young and not very intelligent, and so I don't know how much any of that mattered to me. I didn't rediscover Star Wars until much, much later, but yeah, totally messed it all up.
That's crazy. Right on, Zach. Hit him with the next question.
All right. So who is your favorite hero?
Oh, absolutely Qui-Gon Jinn.
Nice.
Cool.
I think Qui-Gon Jinn, favorite Jedi, one of the best Jedis, one of the only guys that really knows what he's doing through the whole story. He's not beholden to anybody else. He has complete disregard for what anybody else tells him to do, what the council wants, what Obi-Wan wants. There is no internal conflict in Qui-Gon Jinn. You never see him go, well, they're telling me to do this, but I really feel like I need to do this other thing. He just, whether it's cheating a dice with Watto or whatever, he just bulldozes forward and accomplishes everything really he wants. And Qui-Gon, one of the most important characters. If Qui-Gon lives, we don't get the Star Wars, right? It's Qui-Gon's death that creates the Star Wars.
100%. And then Qui-Gon's life after death, I suppose, that teaches him how to be immortal.
Yeah, he's the first one.
Yeah.
Arguably, but I believe he's the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's the first one to tell me no different for sure. I love that. We love Qui-Gon Jinn on this podcast.
Yes.
I think I'm going to say that every time he gets brought up.
Qui-Gon cosplay incoming.
Excellent.
That's
Excellent.
awesome.
Could he do the North Irish accent through the whole cosplay event?
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right.
Your focus determines your reality.
That's there.
All right. So Lance, so we know your favorite hero is. Who's your favorite villain?
Palpatine.
Oh.
Ooh.
Not just favorite Star Wars villain. That's my favorite villain.
Wow.
I think that is the best villain in fiction. He's the smartest man in every room that he's in.
Mm.
He's the master manipulator, but his superpower is he's the master improviser.
Mm.
You know, the plan goes awry many times throughout, especially throughout the prequels, but even through the whole thing, the plan goes awry, and Palpatine is always able to adjust and make it the new plan. The new plan is always better than the old plan. You know, Maul was the plan. And then back to question 2, cuts him in half, right? And so, I mean, spoilers if you haven't seen it. So then he has to pivot, and he pivots to Lord of the Rings, and then he dies, right? And then he has to pivot again, and he pivots to Anakin, and then he gets barbecued, and he creates this new supervillain, Vader, who is one of the most terrifying people to be on screen. I mean, the opening scene of A New Hope, he's scary when he comes through the hallway. And he's on a leash that's held by Palpatine.
Mm.
I mean, the man behind the scariest man. So, Palpatine's the best.
Yeah. Speaking of that first Vader entrance, I love that he actually chokes someone instead of force chokes. He's like, I'm done with it. Wear it, you know.
I never thought about that.
He's like, it's like I force choked a while ago. Now I'm just going in there. Which makes it more terrifying, you know?
Yeah.
Does he ever grab somebody by the neck ever again? Anytime before or after that we've seen?
I don't think so.
No.
Huh. There was something about that captain, Captain Antilles. He was like, nah, I'm putting my actual fingers on his throat. No force for this guy.
How odd. I never thought about that before.
Cool.
Well, speaking of other characters, who is your favorite random alien and or background character? Possibly Cantina, you know, like...
The Cantina Band.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So I always I will watch the Cantina scene over and over and over again. And part of what I love about it is that you have this band playing this song, this over in the background throughout all of this exposition and all of these major moments. And then poor Ponda Baba, or whatever his name is, gets de-armed, right? In the middle of this busy bar. And nobody runs. But you get this, I don't think it's in there, but I hope it's not in there, but you get this mental, like record scratch.
Yeah.
Where the band stops. And everybody looks at each other for a second. And then it's, all right, 2, 3, 4, da, 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 and it just starts back over the top of everything. I think it's hilarious every time.
Mm.
That scene does not work without the Cantina Band.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good insight. And you know, lore reveals about Lance's life as a musician. I kind of like that the first musicians we meet in Star Wars are your favorite kind of like background characters. That's cool.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question. Lance, if you had a lightsaber, what would the color be?
This is tough. Green?
Mm.
Ooh, why?
So I'm kind of OG when it comes to lightsabers. And I like that. I really like what they have done with modern lightsaber colors. I like the orange ones that we see in Ahsoka. I like the white ones that we see in Ahsoka. I like what they're doing with it. But in my mind, you have blue, you have green. If you're one of the coolest actors of all time, you get purple, but only him. Otherwise, it's red, right? If you're bad, it's red.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if it's in a Legends book, but I've always heard that blue is for like the warrior Jedi, and green is for like the sage Jedi.
Yeah.
And so
that was Legends for sure. And it also used to be like if you were a Jedi Knight, you were blue, and if you were a Jedi Master, you got green at one point. But
well, I'll go with green. Plus my man Qui-Gon. So
nice.
I like it. Zach, hit him with the next one.
If you could have a Star Wars tattoo, what would it be? Or if you already have one, what is it?
Yeah, no tats. I'm not at that level of commitment in my life. But totally, episode 4 crawl, just big chest piece. Top to bottom.
Excellent answer.
Yeah,
That's cool. Would you get the Starfield backing it up, or would it just be the yellow on your skin?
just yellow on the skin, and just with the period of Civil War at the top, all the way to like Leia running away.
That's amazing.
You got to skip for the belly button, but top to bottom.
Oh, that's good.
I don't really plan that out too, because you don't want to run out of room and have to get really small.
I don't know that is ever going to be topped.
If anyone has that tattoo, please send us a picture.
Maybe.
Email it in.
Maybe. That's a fantastic answer.
Wow.
I have to give congratulations for that. Okay, so next question. What is your favorite Star Wars story? Could be a movie, could be a novel, could be anything. What's your favorite Star Wars story?
So, like, my favorite story about Star Wars, or my favorite, like, Star Wars narrative?
I think the idea would be your favorite Star Wars narrative, but whatever. What's your favorite story about Star Wars?
My favorite story about Star Wars is our Episode 3 premiere. So to set the mood, right? So Matt's mom comes and pulls us all out of school early.
Cool.
Because she's the cool mom. And
shout out to Mama Beutner.
That's right. And so she, in fact, I almost wore a different shirt. She bought me a Star Wars shirt about a year ago. I almost wore that one, but so she pulls us all out of school and takes us out there, and we're standing in this massive long line at like 2:00 in the afternoon for this midnight showing. And one of our other buddies, acquaintances, who's this fantastic musician, had this big Ewok head on and a mandolin, and was just wandering around the line playing Star Wars tunes on the mandolin. And then these two like professional lightsaber duelists like came out and were like lightsaber fighting and doing all this stuff in the parking lot. It was absolutely an amazing experience, and really that was my rediscovery of Star Wars. I was a Star Wars semi fan. Like I would always go see the new movie when it came out, but it wasn't really my thing at that point. But Matt was my friend, and it was Matt's thing. And so I tagged along because I thought it would be fun. And when I saw the culture behind all of that, I just absolutely fell in love with the medium. And so I've been to every midnight showing since it's been available for Star Wars, and we'll continue to go.
Nice.
That's right. I forgot that you and I have been to every Disney Lucasfilm premiere at midnight.
At midnight, good or bad, we were there.
It works when you live like less than an hour away from each other.
Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. I did not know that was how you rediscovered your love of the wars.
That's it.
That's cool. That's awesome.
So thank you, I guess.
Well, then.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you to Miss Christine.
Thanks to Mama. Thanks to Mom. Thanks, Mom.
Well, that might segue perfectly into the next question. What does Star Wars mean to you?
So, I think what I like about Star Wars, there's several things I like about Star Wars. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. But I think what I like about Star Wars is that it preaches balance over everything, right? And balance in your life, whether it's your professional life, your relationships with the people around you, the way you interact with the world. Balance is how you achieve contentment and who you are. And you see these Jedi that achieve this, and they are content. But it also provides an opportunity for these types of discussions, this type of examination. It builds friendships, it builds culture, it builds relationship. And I don't ever really care what somebody's thing is. If it's Star Trek, if it's Harry Potter. Harry Potter's my backup thing. Or whatever. I judge a little bit on Lord of the Rings. But well, it's just walking. No matter where you turn on the movie, it's just walking. But
shots fired.
Yeah, but whatever it is with your thing, your IP, it allows you to build these friendships and these relationships with the people around you. Even if Star Wars was horrible, and it's not, it's the best, but even if it was horrible, and it allowed us to come here and have these types of conversations and build these types of friendships, it would be worth it. The fact that it's the greatest franchise of all time is just a plus.
Nice.
Shots fired. I love that. Yes, that's why we have this podcast, because it gives us lots of stuff to talk about. I love that answer. Zach, do you want to defend Lord of the Rings for a moment?
I mean, I could do a whole episode on Lord of the Rings. I have an Aragorn. I have an Aragorn cosplay. My 30th birthday was a Lord of the Rings birthday party. So if we wanna debate, I still think Star Wars is top, but Lord of the Rings there for me is my number 2.
So here's what we'll do. We will eventually do a Lord of the Rings debate episode, but we have to do it side by side on treadmills, walking the entire time.
Yeah.
Watching like one of the movies on the TV, but not one of the extended versions, because I don't want to walk on a treadmill for 4 hours.
Hey, I've watched all 3 extended versions in one day with all 7 Hobbit meals, baby.
I feel like the extended versions are just real time for the story. I don't like movies where you can needle drop them at any point and it looks exactly the same.
Hey, Helm's Deep is not walking.
Yeah,
great battle. I go every year, just to put in my Lord of the Rings bona fides, I go every year. Radio City Music Hall here in New York has a live concert version with a 300-person choir and a full orchestra, and they cut out all the music from the movie and they play it live, and that is the way to watch it.
That's cool.
Because the music in it is
it's great.
Like, I mean, John Williams might be one of the best composers of all time, but Howard Shore's right up there as well.
Yeah, it would even be better if they didn't show the movie. If they just played the music.
Get out of here!
I would go to that. I'd fly to New York to hear that.
All right. So basically what we're doing is we are creating a Patreon stretch goal. When we get around to having Patreon, if we reach a certain amount of money, maybe the 3 of us will go walking on treadmills and debating Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But we'd probably have to get, because I'm in the middle of you two on this one. But anyway, neither here nor there. This is the force of others, not the force of rings. So, okay, Lance, we have reached the ridiculous Rathtar question. A question so ridiculous of trivia that you cannot lose, because it's either you are impressive in your level of like nerd knowledge and we're like right on, or it's like congrats, you have a life. So there is no losing. So, tying into what we're about to talk about, that the Clone Wars movie just turned 16, here's my question to you, Lance.
Okay.
How many characters are in the Clone Wars movie and A New Hope? You can name them if you want. Yeah. Or would you rather just try and name them?
I think that's easier.
Okay.
I think that's what you should do. I think that's how you would be able to do it.
Yeah, if I just take a random number guess and I get it wrong, it's like, oh shucks. But if I forget Obi-Wan Kenobi, then I lose fan cred, right?
So there's one. you want me to tell you how many there are, or?
So Obi-Wan, Anakin
Yep.
is in both. Yularen.
Good.
Good. Nice pull. Yes.
Good. So at least get partial credit on this.
Yeah.
How many are there?
Hang on.
Am I like 3 of 5 or 3 of 27?
There are 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're already doing better than I thought. Jabba. Well, but
Yes.
Jabba. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that plays. At least
Okay.
with the way we're doing this, that plays.
Thanks.
You're gonna kick yourself.
Boba, but he's not in 4.
Mm-mm.
Yes, he is. He's in the special edition seat, but Boba's not. This is
He's
Clone
not
Wars
in-
movie.
Oh, Clone Wars movie, not
Yeah.
Clone
Yeah.
Wars.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Who am I missing? Point me in the right direction.
So to be fair,
You got a duo.
I forgot these two as well.
Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't make me feel so bad then.
R2D2 and C3PO.
Oh, come on.
I forgot too. I was texting Zach. I was like, this could be a good question because it's Anakin, Obi-Wan, Jabba, Admiral Wolf Yularen, and then a second went by and I texted him, oh God, and R2 and C3PO. Oh no.
The catalogers of the wars.
But hey man, that's some legit.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
The Wolf
Very
Yularen,
credit
I forgot too. So
Well, that's
That's
always
good stuff.
bothered me. So Yularen has always been. I've always had an issue with Yularen because I don't want to call him a traitor, but like
Ooh.
he is majorly with the Jedi, and then when everything makes its big switch from the Republic to the Empire, he's just like, cool, the check still spins, right? And so he just rotates over and becomes a bad guy.
he's a company man.
He's a company man.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think to me, I struggled with that at the beginning of Clone Wars. Like when that show first came out, I was like, oh, he used to be cool. But then you also go on to Clone Wars, and Tarkin is also a Republic
Yeah, but
officer.
Tarkin was
He's a bad guy.
always like snaky. You know, like
Yeah.
Well, but I think that I honestly, to me, like Yularen and other characters like that in other media, it just goes to show how, number one, how successful Palpatine was in his smear campaign of the Jedi, right? And number two, how mythical, to me, how mythical the Jedi actually were to everyday Star Wars people, that they just didn't really know anything about them at all. Like, they might have thought they were cool, and like, oh, okay, I can see that they're not jerks or whatever, but that everybody just turned on a dime. Their attack has left me scarred and deformed. And they're all like, oh, yeah, I always thought they were weird monks. They must be evil.
Well, we saw an Acolyte. They're not exactly spreading a great reputation across the galaxy, right?
There you go.
yeah.
Yes, keeping it current. Well, and real quick, before we get into the Clone Wars having its Sweet 16, so Lance, because we've talked about it at length, so bringing up the Acolyte, real quick thoughts on how do you think do you think the way the Jedi were portrayed in the Acolyte lines up with how they're portrayed in the prequels? No, sorry, this is off the cuff.
Yeah.
Well, should we just skip to his mailbag then? For
Nah, because I
No?
think I have
Okay.
a way to tie it in.
So no, I think they're portrayed differently.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I think they have ineptitudes that are different. So I think what we see in the Acolyte, or maybe it's what I wanted to see, but I think what we see in the Acolyte is a good organization that's got one cell of people, that one team that maybe doesn't necessarily do a great thing. I think in the prequel trilogy, we have an organization that has really lost connection with the Force. At least greatly lost connection with the Force. And so they're good people. Mace Windu's a good person. You know, Yoda's a good person. Ki-Adi-Mundi is a good person. But they're just operating at about 10% power. and they're too scared to tell anybody that. It's the cloud of the dark side over everything, right? In Acolyte, we were supposed to see Jedi in their heyday, right? We were supposed to see Jedi, and I think ultimately that's what's there in that universe, just off screen, is Jedi that are operating at 100% for the first time in our film history, television show history. We just happened to zoom in on a group of them that weren't the best ones, So no, I don't think they were portrayed the same way.
I like that answer though. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Zach, do you have thoughts on that?
I've talked about it a little bit before. They are as big as they were ever going to be at that point. It seems like, at least from the comics and stuff like that. And I've said it. I said it. Was it 2 weeks ago? Last week? The bigger you get, the more corruption you have. The more that greed brews. The bigger that they are, the more options there are for dips and for people to fall through the cracks. Like we even see it in Acolyte a little bit. There's a couple of Jedi that don't seem to be as up to snuff when they go against the stranger. That one dude just gets right out of the gate murked. He's just down. So I don't know. I don't know if they're. I think they're definitely portrayed differently between the two, but I think it's an interesting look at at an organization that is running at max capacity in the Acolyte, and what that does to your training schedule, and what that does to your training schedule, but what that does to your how to incorporate the core beliefs, because even the group that goes to Ocean May's planet, they're not, they're conflicted, and Torben, who's about to be a Jedi Knight, is not what we see as Jedi Knights later. It's not Obi-Wan being like, I'm ready to face the trials. It's no, I want to get off this planet, which is So
yeah, and that's, well, we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, I completely
Right on.
agree.
Right on. No, that was a cool answer. I like the way that you put that.
Yeah.
That the organization as a whole, but that's the group that we saw specifically, not necessarily operating up to snuff. I thought that was cool. But okay, so to the title of the episode, the Clone Wars movie has turned 16 years old. It premiered. Oh gosh, I had it, but I think it was August. It was either August 10th or August 16th, 2008. So 16 years of the Clone Wars, and I'm going to hand the baton over to Zach.
Yeah. 16 years. It's kind of crazy. A huge show. A show that we got canceled 3 times, 4 times, 3 times. And just kept coming back because fans were like, no, we want more. We want more. Netflix, buy it. We want more. Hey, Netflix, don't do that again. But, it brought us so much lore. It was, for a large generation, my brother's generation, I have a couple of younger brothers, for them, for some people, it's their Star Wars. It's what got them into the fandom, and to have a weekly show is so great, especially of the quality that the Clone Wars, for the most part, is. But yeah, I can't believe it's 16. I feel old, and I think the biggest genius of the Clone Wars is actually making this movie, because it legitimized it in the idea of the fans for a lot of people. It's like, hey, I'm going to introduce Ahsoka here, and if you'd just done that on a TV show, I think a large portion of the fandom would have been like, it's just that little cartoon, it's not canon. But the fact that he was like, no, we're going to do a movie, it's going to be in theaters, this is canon, I'm George Lucas.
I like to think that's how he ends every sentence.
Yeah, it's a movie. I'm George Lucas. Matt, your overall thoughts?
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. The Clone Wars show is one of my favorite things, just kind of period. End of that sentence. In my opinion, I'm not the biggest fan of the movie, but I think that makes sense when you take into account why it was made, because these were episodes that George was like, yeah, great, fine, go take the 2D show and make it 3D, and it'll be fine. We'll find a network to put it up on. And then he saw the quality and was like, oh, this is good stuff. This is cinema. We're going to take some of these first 4 episodes and we're going to make them a movie.
Yeah.
And they said, you want us to do what? It's not one story. And that's part of why the movie feels so disjointed. You do introduce Ahsoka, and then you have the whole episode of going to rescue Jabba the Hutt's, or story of going to rescue Jabba the Hutt's son. And it's almost completely disconnected from that.
Yeah.
And there's like a time jump in the movie that they just kind of don't really address. Like, once they start to go rescue... but Lance, your original question was going to be, what was the name of Jabba's son? Do you know?
Stinky.
That's what I said.
His name is Rata, but I don't know if they say that on screen. And that was part of why I didn't go with that
how would
question.
I know?
Exactly. Hey, you crushed the question that you got. But
on screen, they call him Stinky.
That's true. But speaking of stinky, kind of to your point, Zach, about like legitimizing Ahsoka, I don't know, or at least me personally, I have never met anybody that liked Ahsoka at the time of that movie coming out. Nobody did. They were like, who's this girl and why is she like annoying? Well, Anakin didn't have a Padawan. That's stupid. What? As she has grown, she's become a really more well-liked character. We're going to talk about that more later. But in terms of the movie, I like it now. I didn't really like it then. But anyway, I've talked enough about it. Lance, your overall thoughts on the show turning and the movie turning 16?
Well, I think that the Clone Wars is so important to Star Wars, just as a fandom. It was the first time we got that amount of volume of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And so, it allowed all the cracks to be sealed up, right? And so the fact that it's 16 years old is crazy, but it provides so much to the franchise that it's hard to believe we existed before it.
Yeah.
It's the same way I feel about the prequels, right? Everybody will jump on the prequels, but we didn't have Sith. We didn't have. We had a mention of Clone Wars, but we had no idea what that concept was, right? There's so much that got brought up in the prequel trilogy that didn't exist in the original trilogy. Sometimes we forget what it's like to experience the original trilogy without that back knowledge.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, when I was watching the Clone Wars movie yesterday, I was trying to think through everything that they're putting on screen and going, oh my gosh, we watched episode 3 before this.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like we didn't have all of this off-screen stuff filled in when we were trying to experience like G-level Star Wars.
Yeah.
G-level canon.
Thank you.
Nice.
So, just and that kind of ties very well into the next thing. Or Zach, did you have something?
No,
else to say?
I was going to do the same segue you're doing.
Hit it. Go ahead.
No, you brought it up. I mean, Lance, what are your thoughts? Can you go into more on your thoughts on the impact of the lore? Like the show gives us 7 seasons of lore.
Well, just think about everything that it gave us. First of all, I think the most work that the Clone Wars does is it gives us a heroic Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah.
Right? If we didn't have the Clone Wars movie, which if we didn't have the movie, we wouldn't have the show. We're kind of talking about them all together here, but
Yes.
we wouldn't have all of the things that matter about our characters with the heroism of Anakin, with the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan, the relationship between Anakin and Padme, all this stuff that makes Episode 3 heartbreaking happens off screen if you just watch the episodic movies.
Yeah.
But we don't really care. That's the reason that Anakin comes. That's one of the reasons that Anakin comes off so creepy with Padme, right? Is because Anakin goes from 0 to 100 with Padme, and we don't really get a lot of that reciprocated on screen.
Yeah.
But if you watch the Clone Wars, you see this relationship grow into this really deep, profound love that just gets ripped apart in Episode 3, right? Designed by Palpatine, the greatest villain. And in the same way, we get the "You Were My Brother," the whole wonderful scene with Obi-Wan and Anakin when they're having their duel. Doesn't mean that much if all you see is Obi-Wan just chastising Anakin and telling him he's not good enough all the time on screen.
Yeah.
But what you see in the Clone Wars is these guys being brothers, these guys being equals, and being mutually respectful of each other. You also get everything built up with Rex, everything built up with Order 66, right? Think about how much more Order 66 meant at the end of the Clone Wars than what it did when it was on screen. I mean, the little handheld Palpatine, toy Palpatine was really cool. And just watch all these Jedi get mowed down. Yeah. But it wasn't emotionally impactful. But after watching the relationship between all these people and watching, especially that was in the Clone Wars, wasn't it? I get all my different shows mixed up. When you see them have to try to pull the chips out of their heads.
Yeah. It might have been the first season of Bad Batch, but I think...
That's what I wondered. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, but they do mention the chips in the Clone Wars, because that one guy goes... one clone, it activates early.
Right, right. And so these clones are heartbroken.
Yeah.
To think about how much they have been manipulated. Technologically manipulated. And that they're put in a position where they're going to kill all of these people. They're going to kill Ahsoka after the relationship that has been built over all of these years, right? Let's see. We also get Mortis, which is huge.
Yeah.
And if we didn't have the Clone Wars, we wouldn't have Mortis. Think about everything that takes away from Anakin, from Vader in the original trilogy.
Yeah.
Right. So, Lance, I got a real quick question about Mortis. Do you interpret the Mortis stuff literally? Do you think everything that happens on those 3 episodes, does that all literally take place? This isn't a trap. I'm curious.
It's a trap. I do think it is a trap, and I will spring it in the Star Wars way. So, yes, I interpret it literally.
Cool.
But only 60%. If you're gonna put numbers on that, it's in my head it's 60%, it's 100% literal, and it's 40%, it's 100%, just happening in their heads. But to quote the second greatest franchise of all time, of course it's happening in their heads. That doesn't make it not real.
Is that Harry Potter?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. Well, right on. Okay, so, or Zach, what did you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it brought so much Lord of the Rings lore into Star Wars through Dave Filoni, which is just absolutely amazing.
You're not wrong.
I'm not wrong. Ahsoka is Gandalf. No, I think I agree with everything that you said, Lance. I mean, bringing in Ahsoka, who is now, I would say 50% of the fan base's favorite character. I mean, I have an Ahsoka tattoo. That's my interview question. Gives us that, it brings back Maul. It saves Maul, from just being this like, assassin to like really being a really beautiful character. The clones, I mean, who would have thought that we would have, mourned the loss of humanity of the clones, because that's what the chip is. It takes away their choice. I think it's beautiful. Does it have its problems with certain arcs that are just unwatchable? Yeah. Certain arcs that...
Assuming you're talking about
when I was,
D-Squad.
Yes, when Matt and I were Matt introduced me to the Clone Wars in college when we were roommates, and we used to, like, after, like, classes, we would just watch episodes. And there was an arc, there's 2 arcs I remember specifically that Matt was like, we're just going to skip it. Which was the D Squad and one other one. I to this day have still not watched those arcs.
well, and what's funny about that is Matt introduced me to the Clone Wars when we were roommates when I was in graduate school, and I was totally against Star Wars animation. I thought it was for kids.
Me too.
And Matt pushed and pushed and pushed that I really should watch it, and he made me a list of the episodes that I need to watch and the episodes that are skippable in order to get through all the seasons and get caught up before it was re-released for, at that point, the second
Season
or third
7
time
or,
it came back on. So,
yeah.
Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.
And last thing I'll say about the lore is Season 7. I think besides the 3 episodes that are kind of like nebulous Ahsoka episodes, those last 3 episodes with Order 66 and Mandalore and all that, I think that's some of the best Star Wars that we have. Impactful on the story, on the character, on everything. And I love those edits where people take it and edit into episode 3. That's the way to watch episode 3 now, like with those like little edits from that Clone Wars. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
We'll do a commentary track on one of those edits eventually.
Matt, what's your impact on the lore? Thoughts?
Well, yeah. So Lance talked about it. Both of y'all did. Order 66. Mm-hmm. That's probably, honestly, that is the biggest. That's the biggest ripple effect for me coming out of all the Clone Wars stuff. I remember, after, like we've talked about, one of the times that it was canceled, the first time it was canceled, Dave Filoni was on something. He was interviewed somewhere. I don't remember. But he said that one of the things that they didn't get to do, that they had planned to do, was that they were going to show what made Order 66 happen. They were going to explain it. And this was going to be the George Lucas explanation, because people forget now that George was heavily involved in Clone Wars. But the expanded universe at the time had an explanation for Order 66, and it was that the clones were in on it the whole time.
Yeah.
And then we're all watching this Clone Wars show going, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because in Revenge of the Sith, the clones they all look and behave, they are indistinguishable. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that was the stylistic choice at the time. They could only do so much. That they were able to recreate Tamura Morrison's face that many times was huge for 2005, and that it looked like as good as it did was massive. But then you start watching the Clone Wars show, and they're all different. They're all unique. The Jedi push their differences and their uniqueness, and I'm sitting here going, this does not make sense. Why would they kill them? And then they get the brilliant addition of it was beyond their control. They had no say, and it ties back into Attack of the Clones when the Kaminoans say, we did some genetic modification to make them more docile, make them easier, more willing to follow orders, right? But all this ties into a kind of a bigger, almost real-life thing that the Clone Wars did to lore, in that it changed the way it worked for the expanded universe. We mentioned earlier G-level canon, and I think I've said in the first episode of the podcast the tiers of canon that existed in the expanded universe. People will tell you this is not the case, but it is. You can look it up. George Lucas never cared what was in comics or novels or any of that unless, like, he sees Quinlan Voss, and he was like, that's a cool-looking character. I'm going to put him as an extra in episode 1. And they're like, well, do you care about his story? No, but he looks cool, so I'm going to put him in the movie. And then you can get into some kind of, like, potentially not great stuff where he's like, I like Darth Talon. She's pretty. If I do the sequels, she's going to be the villain. And it's like, okay. So, like, visual concepts, he would be like, yes, I'm going to steal that. I like that a lot. The name of the capital of the Republic, Coruscant, that was a Timothy Zahn creation. That was not a George Lucas creation. So he would take things, but it never counted to him. And there are lots of quotes where he said, they're doing their own thing, and I'm letting them do their own thing, but if I ever get around to making more movies, it's not going to take those things into account. And so there were tiers of canon. And there were answers to all the different lore bits that we've talked about in the old expanded universe and all the novels and all of the comics pre-Disney and stuff, most of which the Clone Wars show outright not only retconned, like destroyed, obliterated. And you can go on Reddit today and find tons of people that hate the Clone Wars for retconning all those books. Look up the whole thing about the Karen Travis Mandalorian novels, that, like, the clones in the EU were Mandos. They were Mandalorians. And that all kind of went away. And so that's the biggest impact, in that it changed how it worked. And it's one of the things that I think absolutely necessitated, after the Disney buyout happened, them saying, moving forward, canon is canon.
Yeah.
There are no tiers. It all plays. There's definitely contradictions still. You see it all the time. But none of it outright. We're never going to get anything as egregious, at least I hope not, as the Order 66 discrepancy, of that there were books for years about how the clones were in on it all the time. And then George is like, nah, mind control. So, but yeah, that's my thoughts on all the lore.
Yeah. Well, moving on from lore, Lance, will you talk about your thoughts on the impact on the fans from the show?
Sure. So I was late, like I said before. I was late to the Clone Wars train.
As
okay.
a lot of, I think most Clone Wars fans were.
Yeah, and I think animation was a very difficult thing for people to get over. And so I actually, and Matt, you might remember this, but I actually started with Rebels.
Oh, really?
Oh.
You remember that conversation I had? And I said, well, because Rebels had just come out, and so I was watching through it, and I was loving it, and you said, you have to watch Clone Wars if you're going to watch Rebels. And I made the comment that, like, well, but Rebels, look how good it looks, and it's beautiful, and look at the animation, and Clone Wars is old, and I don't know that I want to. And you were the one that said, like, just turn it on. You're gonna see the difference here. And so the first time that and the movie is kind of like this, but once you get into the first season and you see that these people, they were animating the corner of the screen. I mean, the visual space that they were using was just amazing for animation. And it really showed fandom that an animated Star Wars TV show can be a viable way to consume the medium, right? And so as far as its effect on fandom, it was the gateway to every Star Wars TV show, almost every Star Wars media, book, anything that we've gotten since then. It was so much volume that was dumped on us over a decade that everything else had to be related to it.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't have got any of the Mandalorian stuff.
100%.
That's true. Right on. So Zach, talk about the fans.
Yeah, I mean, Lance kind of put it perfectly. I think a lot of fans came to it slowly and with much trepidation, but I think it won most fans over, except for those hardcore, EU people. But I think it saved Star Wars for a little bit. There was a portion where we just didn't have any movies, and it became something that you could watch and be like, oh, I can get my little Star Wars fix. Oh, wait, they're actually doing really cool stories. Oh, wait, Anakin and Obi-Wan are brothers. It really just evolved so much, and everything, like Lance said, everything is built on it now. The Mandalorian literally shows us the War of Mandalore in the show, and Ahsoka giving us a live action, version of the Clone Wars with Captain Rex in it in full, like actual visual medium with actors that. Talking about Clone Wars, that also legitimizes the show too, of being like, here's Anakin in that weird armor plate thing that he had in the cartoon, which might not be what they were when they were animating it, what they thought, but that's what everybody else did,
Well, robes are hard to animate.
Yes, so. Especially in that style. So I think it's beautiful. I think the impact. It impacted me. I got a freaking Star Wars tattoo from it, so.
Right on.
You, Matt?
Yeah. So, oddly enough, while I'm responsible for infecting you both with a love of the Clone Wars, or even watching the Clone Wars, I don't think I watched any of it until the summer between seasons 3 and 4. Because it was the exact same thing. I was like, well, this is for kids. And then I heard all of the negative reviews of what is still to this day, if I remember correctly, the worst reviewed and the lowest grossing Star Wars theatrical release, which is the Clone Wars movie. And I was like, yeah, it's for kids. It's not for me, man. And then every now and then, you check in and you hear about things that happen and you're like, wait, okay, that sounds kind of cool. But nah, not for me. And then it's like, wait, hold on. They're going to bring back Darth Maul? Okay, how could you... I might be interested. But the biggest impact that I think it gave to fans in general, like y'all talked about, all the lore, kind of filling in gaps, everything else, making Star Wars viable on TV. Because outside of the 2D Clone Wars, the Genndy Clone Wars... this was the first, actually successful Star Wars TV show. No offense to droids or Ewoks from the 80s, but
a little offense.
You can watch him on Disney Plus now and go, wow, we've come a long way, haven't we? You ever want to appreciate Resistance? Watch Ewoks and droids and go, oh, okay.
If you want to watch The Principal from, what is that movie? The 80s movie with the Brat Pack.
The Breakfast Club?
The Breakfast Club. If you want to watch The Principal from The Breakfast Club in Star Wars, go watch Ewoks.
Wait a minute. What?
He's the main character. They should have used that
when they were marketing for the show. I would have watched it.
I don't know that. Wow. Okay. That's crazy. Okay, well, maybe I will. Maybe we'll watch droids top to bottom just for that.
You don't have
to. But the biggest impact that I think it had on the fans, more than legitimizing anything on TV, it is, in my opinion, the best example that I've ever seen of a narrative or a show growing up with its audience. Like when you watch the first season of Clone Wars, all the droids are like, well, here comes a dumb droid joke, blah, 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 blah. And they're Three Stooges every 3 seconds. Took me right out the show. I may very well have seen that, and been like, this is just not for me. But then as you get later on, at the middle of season 4, Ahsoka decapitates 4 people. When she takes out all those Mandos, which is not to say that that's better and the silly stuff is dumb, but it grows up with the audience. And like Zach said, the Siege of Mandalore, granted, that doesn't come out till early 2020 or 2021, I think. But that is some of the most mature, meaningful, important Star Wars anything we've gotten in any medium.
Yeah.
And it's what I love about the show. It grew up with the audience. You can start a kid... A child on Clone Wars and just let them grow up with the show. You probably wouldn't want to show, Siege of Mandalore to like a 4-year-old. They'd be, why is everybody so sad? I don't think that would work. But anyway, that's my take on the fan impact.
Lance, that's your homework. We'll check in about 10 years. You let us know how it went.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Well, we've talked about her a lot, but I think you can't mention the Clone Wars and not talk about Ahsoka. Lance, what are your thoughts on Ahsoka, her impact on the story? You've talked about it a little bit, but give us a little deep dive on your thoughts on Ahsoka.
So I struggled with Ahsoka at first. They really had to move past the Snips thing before I was okay with it. Even though when they brought Snips back at the end, it was sad. But Ahsoka served a really interesting role, and that's that. So we see the Jedi Order rapidly falling off, right, by the end of Episode 3. And yet Ahsoka served the role of staying true to, if not Jedi ideals, the light side of the Force, the balance of the Force. And the only way we really get to see how far off the Jedi have fallen is by juxtaposing them to her, right? Yeah. So it's all this, it's the idea of relativity, right? So we see this relative fall of the Jedi by the trueness of Ahsoka. And she, once they have the arc with, where she gets accused of what, terrorism?
Yeah.
Which is crazy on a kid's show. But yeah, she gets accused of terrorism. And they sacrifice her up in this horrible way. And she walks away from it. And Anakin doesn't walk away from it. And Obi-Wan doesn't walk away from it. I mean, our heroes stay Jedi after that's over, which is crazy to me. Qui-Gon would have left.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, Qui-Gon would have left after that happened. But Ahsoka goes on to be one of the few, and we'll talk about this later, but one of the few pure good characters that we get. She has her internal struggles, but Ahsoka does the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think we were lacking that in prequel era Star Wars.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I mean, Ahsoka's my favorite character. Right up there with Obi-Wan for me. But to see, I think the beauty of Ahsoka is giving us another look at Anakin and Darth Vader in a way that we didn't get to see ever. He's always, throughout the entire prequels, he's, the young and rash one. Like, we don't get to see him really be wise. We just get to see him be good. We get to see him be the best pilot and the best fighter, and arrogant, but we don't get to see his heart as much unless it's with Padme, and then it's kind of creepy because it's really rushed, Ahsoka gives us the Anakin that is a friend, is a brother, is a mentor, and it makes his fall so much more devastating. We talked a little, you mentioned Rebels, so I'll mention it a little bit, but season 2, end of Rebels, with that fight between Ahsoka and, spoilers, Ahsoka and Vader, is also peak Star Wars, which I thought Ahsoka died at the end of that, and I sobbed. I'm a big crier when it comes to movies, podcast listeners. I'm the Kevin Smith of this podcast. I mean that with all respect. I love Kevin Smith. But no, she is so impactful. To have a character who we didn't think was going to be in the original trilogy make it through the original trilogy as well, also wild. But just have all of this insight into Darth Vader and into Anakin, and really be, really show us the, you were my brother Anakin from another perspective, from a, someone who's looking up to him rather than mentoring him, I think is just so special. Matt?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm on the same. Here's my hot take when it comes to Ahsoka. I think beginning to end, including her annoying little kidness, I think she is the best written Star Wars hero.
Yeah.
I think that overall her arc is the most consistent, and I think that comes from, not that it should always be this way for every character, but Dave Filoni has been basically exclusively in charge of every canon story featuring Ahsoka. When you take into account that even, he talks about it now in lots of interviews, but Filoni himself, when he was showing George concept art for characters that would be on the Clone Wars show, he was just making up ideas. George pointed at the Ahsoka one and said, "That's Ahsoka. That's Anakin's Padawan." And Filoni was like, "George, Anakin doesn't have a Padawan." And George Lucas just looked at him and said, "Anakin has a Padawan." And he said, "Okay, yes, sir, understood, all right."
I am George Lucas.
Yeah, it's just like, Anakin has a Padawan. He's like, okay. And then that they took that moment of, again, George seeing a concept he likes and make it work. That's in my story now. And they took Ahsoka and made her into something to show Anakin's fall, that she was a plan. They show multiple times on the Clone Wars, once in the movie and then a couple times on the show, where they're like, is Anakin ready for an apprentice? And Yoda's like, well, that doesn't really matter. What matters is he needs to be ready to let her go. That they know that Anakin's problem is attachment and the fear of loss, and this was a way, you could argue manipulative as it is, to kind of force an attachment to make Anakin potentially have to be okay with letting her go. Not that they planned on kicking her out, but that just in general, try and get Anakin used to letting people go and getting over that. But then when you look at the way when she, again, spoilers, but whatever, Rebels is like,
It's Clone Wars 2.0.
I think it's 9 years. But I was going to say, I think Rebels, the first season is like 9 years old now, or something like that. But when she showed up at the end of season 1, we all kind of knew, but I screamed, stood up, ran around the apartment, and lost my mind. I just think in every iteration she stays consistent and she stays interesting, and that now that she's successfully transitioned into live action and you have a pretty solid movie star playing her, I just, I'm going to be shameless and say I want more Ahsoka forever, and I kind of only want her to ever be written by Dave Filoni. So those are all my Ahsoka thoughts.
Well, and kudos to Disney for not killing her off.
Yeah.
Because we all thought when they present Anakin's Padawan that this girl is toast, right? She is a zombie at this point because she's not in any of the stuff we've seen before. There's no way she makes it to the end.
Yeah.
And then they just keep bringing her on. I mean, what is she? A Tor? What's her?
Togrutan.
Yeah.
I always want to call her a Tortuga. But
Me
that's,
too.
She's a Togrut or whatever she is. Do they live forever? I mean, she's in every period of Star Wars really that we've gotten since the prequels. So I hope they keep her going.
Well, and she's probably only like 40 something, I think, because she's like 14 on Clone Wars, which is, or at least when it starts, which is like wild to wrap your mind around. And then we're only like 30 years on from that, maybe 35-ish.
Well, Vanestra was already a Jedi Knight by that point. But yeah.
One last thing to add about Ahsoka, and just all of Clone Wars in general, I think you can't talk about Ahsoka without talking about Ashley Eckstein and her excellent voiceover work. And all of the voiceover work on the Clone Wars, I mean, is amazing. Matt Lantern, James Arnold Taylor, Sam Witwer, which will get us into our next thing. But I got to meet Ashley once at a Comic-Con, and I can't tell you, she's one of the nicest people I've ever met. Like, not at the one that we went to, Matt.
Well, but we did. I just remembered. I asked her a question, but
did
tell
we
your
meet
story
her
first.
then?
Sorry. We did. I got. Sorry. Finish your
she
story,
was so
and then I'll
nice.
tell
So I
mine.
met her at New York Comic Con. She was in her universe booth, just chilling, like selling her merch, And I was like, I was like, that's Ashley Eckstein. I gotta go up and say hi, you know? I was like, hi, Ashley. And she's like, yeah. I was like, I just want to say I'm a huge fan. And she was so, so nice and sweet. And she's like, have we met before? I was like, if we did, it was like 6 years ago, and there's no way you should remember me. She's like, you got a familiar face. And she was just so, so sweet and, like, kind and gracious. And she talked to me for, like, 10 minutes about, you know, voiceover, you know, because that's when I was, like, thinking about getting into it. And so she really just is, I mean, she is Ahsoka, and she always will be. Rosario is great, but, like, Ashley is Ahsoka. And Rosario is, I mean, she's doing fantastic work as well, but I had to mention it. So
No, that's a good mention. But then also it reminded me, and tying into what Lance was talking about, this is the con that Zach and I went to in 2011 that we mentioned, I don't know, one of the other episodes.
Yeah, I guess my phone wasn't working that day. I was trying to see. I was scrolling through all of our text messages, and I missed that one. So we'll blame AT&T for that.
Who knows where my mind was at in October 2011? Sorry, Lance. But
all right.
Yeah, Lance and I could have been friends way sooner, Matt.
Yeah, this is fair. I've never been shamed for not inviting someone to something 13 years after it took place. But two of the biggest Star Wars people that were at this convention were Peter Mayhew and Ashley Eckstein, and I got both of them to sign, and it was really funny because I had two diametrically opposed experiences. I fanboyed Peter Mayhew way too hard. Peter Mayhew was the actor that portrayed Chewbacca, if anybody doesn't know, in the original movies. He's huge. Well, he was sitting, and you could tell that he was having a long day, and his joints were starting to really get after him. He was not doing well. But there was a picture of Chewie and Ahsoka next to each other, because that was the intention. Get that picture and get them both to sign it, because there was the crossover arc on Clone Wars or whatever, right? And I got Peter Mayhew to sign that, and he's working on it, and I was just like, thank you for all your work, sir. It's really cool to meet someone that was on screen even when I was a little kid. It means a lot. And he goes, yep. And I was like, okay, cool. Yep, take care. Yep. And then I went over to Ashley, and tying into what Lance was talking about, how we all thought she was toast. She was like, there's no way, right? Which just goes on to show, you know, the biggest lesson in Ahsoka as a character and all the different things she's shown up in, the golden rule of continuity. If you don't mention something, that doesn't mean it hasn't happened off screen, right? But that I said to Ashley, I was like, hey, as an actor, what's it like portraying a character whose fate is uncertain, that we're pretty sure she's probably not going to make it because we don't hear from her in season 3. And I remember her eyes, she was like, wild. And she basically said, well, if I remember right, she said something along the lines of, well, I don't know her fate either. Filoni won't necessarily tell me, but it keeps it fun to hopefully, I think she said something along the lines of, again, this is a long time ago, of I just hope my performance is fun enough and interesting enough that the fans will campaign for me to live, which is, of course, what eventually happened. So it was pretty cool.
A 1 week performance and you could die.
Yeah, Filoni being like, I don't like it. All right, let's kill her off. We've had enough.
Yeah, she had an off week. She's out of
here. You mentioned, Matt mentioned it, or Lance mentioned it, but Maul, I think, is also very important to talk about when talking about the Clone Wars, because it is what brought, I think, a lot of us into it, being like, oh, wait, he is back? He got chopped in half. What do you mean? Lance, what were your views on Maul coming back?
Oh, I love Maul coming back. That's one of the greatest things that the Clone Wars did, because they, and this is something I love about Episode 1, which I know a lot of people struggle with that. But Maul was so good. He was such a good villain, and they just killed him at the end of. I mean, he's just a one-off. He's a one-off villain. And, you know, they did the same thing with Vader, right? Vader is supposed to be this one-off, A New Hope, you know, goon. And the fans loved him so much, and he was so good. Well, George loved him so much, really, is what it was, because it was pre-release, that they have to put that little clip in there of him spinning back so that we know he didn't get offed by Han. So in the same way, they brought they brought Maul back. They gave him his spider legs, which was weird. Didn't really like that. But once
Matt loved it.
Yeah, he would. Once Mother Talzin, what was that her name?
Yes,
gives
Mother
him
Talzin.
his like real robot legs, I was totally all for Maul. And we get to see through Maul, and this really gets more into Rebels, but we get to see through Maul the tragedy of the dark side, right? So we always talk about the tragedy of Anakin falling from grace, right? Falling from this being this huge hero to being this evil, heartbroken villain, right? And that is one of the greatest things about Star Wars. But this is the first time that we see what happens to a villain. He was born a villain. If you have read Plagueis, I don't want to get too into spoilers, but he's born a villain. He's raised a villain. He's been created from the time he was an infant to be the apprentice to Palpatine. And then he messes up, and Palpatine just casts him out. And that's it, just drops him like he's nothing. And so he has to figure out who he is now, and that's the great part when he drops the Darth part of his name. It just says, I'm Maul, right? And so when he becomes Maul, and we get to see him in all the different crime syndicates and get to see what happens to somebody who just gets dropped, and the hatred that he feels for two men, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Palpatine.
Yeah.
And he hates those two guys, two completely opposed guys. So we don't get that without the Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
It's just on a long list of things that would never exist in Star Wars fandom.
Yeah.
And it's some of the top tier Star Wars that we have.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I was on the fence about Savage Opress for when he was introduced, but then it's like, oh wait, but that leads to Maul, and then their dynamic, great. You know, bringing back Maul, I think, is one of the best decisions they did in the Clone Wars, because it did bring so many fans into it, you know, and it kind of, you know, just made the audience way bigger for the show. And just to see, I agree, just to see his fall and to see how weird he got in the trash compactor and the spider legs, and like when he's like reciting the Sith code, you know, like just to like mentally try and stay there. And I love that he's mentally broken, and then somebody mentions Kenobi and he's like, oh no, I remember who did it to me now, I'm back. Like, my mind is there. You just had to say the one of two people that I hate, and I am focused, and I'm gonna mess stuff up, you know?
Well, and isn't Sam Witwer so great?
Oh, so good.
And when he says Kenobi on that show,
yeah,
that's great.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, Sam Witwer, I'm so glad he got his day in the sun, because, I mean, I loved The Force Unleashed, but it was like, oh, well, that's not canon and all that. And then you get Sam Witwer, who might be the biggest Star Wars fan on the planet, to like get a voice and just knock it straight out of the park, you know. But Matt, your thoughts on Maul?
Yeah. So Maul as just a whole thing is, in my opinion, the best example of canon working. It's kind of the opposite of Ahsoka. Ahsoka's pretty much always been shepherded by Dave Filoni. Maul has had a lot of different people adding on to his story, and it's one of the examples of it working and making him more interesting. And it's George Lucas not caring what anyone else says. He's going to do what he wants to do. Like, again, you can see these Dave Filoni interviews where one day George walked into Filoni's office and was like, I have an idea. It's going to be good. And Dave's like, that's usually not the case. What are we doing? And George says, we're going to bring back Maul. And Filoni was like, what? Why? How on earth could we ever do that? And he's like, well, figure it out. Bye. and he's like, okay. And I think that's also George learning, because he did the same thing to Boba Fett, where Star Wars has this habit of making really, really visually interesting villains that they look so archetypally evil, and they say so little. They just act. That we're able to fill in all the gaps in our mind, and that makes them more interesting. Maul hardly talks in episode 1. Every line that he says is killer, is just the best. But he's got like 8 lines, I think. Like when it's time to meet the Jedi and
reveal ourselves to the Jedi. I think that's it.
At last we will have revenge.
Well, and
But like when he
was that Ray Park actually delivering those
No,
lines?
it wasn't.
so that was Peter Serafinowicz.
Just have that in your pocket. Okay.
Well, I had it somewhere. Hey, there's too much stuff up here. One day we'll have an episode of let's just try and stump Matt, and it'll take I won't have my lunch money at the end of the episode. It'll take a long time, but like even when talking about how little Maul actually says, when we've reached the climax of the movie and the Jedi are taking off their robes and Maul's taking off his robe and they're getting ready to fight, all he does is look at him and growl. He doesn't say some monologue. He just growls and is all business. And when Star Wars makes villains like that, like Boba Fett and like Maul, I think George's penchant is to, I don't know why you fans are so obsessed. They're just a goon. So Boba Fett drops into the Sarlacc pit. His death is a joke. And I think that over time, and the same thing with Maul, you see him get cut in half. And George has said that he had the camera show him cut in half. So that there's like, they're not bringing him back in a novel. He's done. He's toast. And I think over time, George probably went, all right, this character is kind of interesting. Let's bring him back. And then Filoni brings in the Shelob Lord of the Rings lore. Do not put a Shelob picture on the video. Of that Maul, to survive, has had to become an archetypal monster. That his rage is what's keeping him alive. His dark, the pure dark side of the Force. The feeling like you deserve more. And being very selfish is literally all that sustained him, and it made him a monster, and he lost his mind. Because he spent about, somewhere between 10 and 12 years in apparently the subterranean level on a junk planet, just eating people. But then all the other stuff that gets added on to Maul. When he showed up at the end of Solo, I think I was sitting next to Lance. I'm pretty sure I had to physically restrain myself from screaming. Because I was like, holy, and I won't say curse words. Sorry for blowing out the mic. But I went, and then just to keep from just shrieking like a little kid. But in everything we get about him works. Like Lance said earlier, the tragedy of the dark side. Freddie Prinze Jr. said it best in his legendary Star Wars rant. If you haven't seen it, look it up. Don't look it up at work because he cusses a lot. But that Maul is Sisyphus.
Yeah.
And he knows he's Sisyphus, but he's Sisyphus. He is destined to push the boulder up the hill only for it to roll down every single time. He has all of the confidence and all of the appearance of a real villain, but none of, really, to be honest, none of the intelligence. When he and his death, spoilers, at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's some of the best storytelling we've gotten in Star Wars. We'll break it all down at some point, but it shows how Obi-Wan has moved past who he used to be, and that Maul is stuck exactly as who he was nearly 30 years before. When they first fought, he's still that same guy. Yeah. And Obi-Wan takes him out in a moment, and only in his dying breaths is Maul like, oh, I lived wrong. I just think he pushes Palpatine for being my favorite villain.
Yeah. Good.
So there you go.
Good stuff. All right. Well, to finish up our talk about the Clone Wars, Lance, do you think the Clone Wars TV series saved the prequels?
I'm not sure
if the prequels
saved
needed
the prequels.
saving.
Yes. So the prequels needed something. Now, I will say that Episode 3 is one of my favorite Star Wars movies.
Yes.
I really have a hard time with the ranking. I don't like the idea of that. But the third act of Star Wars Episode 3 is phenomenal. It's some of the most emotional, profound. I mean, it matters so much what's happening. You have all these juxtaposed scenes. You have Anakin and Obi-Wan fighting in literal hell, for the fate of Anakin, and then you have Palpatine and who looks like a demon at this point, and Yoda fighting for the fate of the galaxy in the Senate chambers, which could not be, a better setting for it. It's fantastic. But almost everything you need to really appreciate the prequels happens off screen.
Yeah.
And so what the Clone Wars does is it's the meat for all of that. And maybe the prequel trilogy was too big of a bite for the amount of screen time they were going to be able to have. And maybe you needed something like a TV show just to provide the sheer hours that you need to tell that story. But the other thing that the Clone Wars does is it allows kind of a retake on a lot of things. I always think the best example, I think, is the sand quote, right? What does Anakin say about sand in Episode 2?
I hate sand.
It's rough.
It's rough, coarse, irritating. It gets everywhere.
Yeah.
Not like here. Everything's so soft. And then he does the weird...
Soft and smooth. I hate that, soft and smooth. Yeah, it's
so
horrible.
gross.
Right? Now, what does Anakin say about the desert in the Clone Wars? Right?
The desert takes everything from
The
you.
desert is merciless. Takes everything from you, right? How much better is that? And I love Hayden Christensen. I think Hayden Christensen is a great actor. And I don't think that he's bad in the prequel trilogy. I think he gets portrayed as being much worse than he actually is.
He was given
Go back and watch
terrible
it.
writing.
Yeah, the writing is terrible. What kind of, you could give Robert De Niro that line and it's going to come off creepy, right? Who could deliver those lines? It's like Harrison Ford said in Episode 4, right? When he was talking to George, he says, you can't say this stuff. It's not real. It looks good on paper, but you can't say this.
Yeah.
And so they let Matt Lanter kind of redo Anakin in such a really perfect way.
Yeah.
That it makes the prequel trilogy work when it didn't work before. Now, is the hate that has dissipated for the prequel trilogy, is that because everybody went and watched the Clone Wars? I don't think so. I think it's just because so much of what they've made currently has been so bad that people have gone back and looked at the prequel trilogy and said, actually, this is not that bad. If you put it in the big bucket of Star Wars, this is not that bad. And I think that's been a lot of the solution to the prequel problem.
I agree with what a lot of what you said. Attack of the Clones is my least favorite Star Wars movie and maybe Star Wars story. But I think the Clone Wars is one of my favorites, and I think it's one of the rare instances where more information makes things better. Usually it's like, cool, if you keep it simple, stupid. But with the prequels, there's so much going on and so much politically that giving it that off-screen context, like you said, Lance, I think I agree. It makes it better. I think it does save the prequels, for me at least, because it develops the relationships that you just don't have time to develop in the movies. And so for me, I feel like it did save Star Wars. Matt, what is your thoughts?
Well, I don't know why I rocked into the camera that intensely. That's going to be fun for the YouTube people. But I think kind of similar to what Lance said. Well, first I have a question, because we're all old enough to have been around. Do y'all remember reactions to the prequels? Do you remember what people felt about those movies at the time?
All I remember is dressing up as Darth Maul for, I think, 3 Halloweens in a row. And being like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I loved it. I loved those movies as a kid. So I never really interacted with the hate except for Jar Jar Binks.
We didn't really have social media. We had like MySpace a little bit by episode 3, Zanga, if we want to get really old, but there wasn't really a way for me to interact with the rest of the Star Wars fandom when those movies were coming out. All I saw was that episode 1 was packed for weeks and weeks. And episode 3, by the time we were there, I mean, you had 500 people standing outside a theater in May, or whenever it was, I think it was May, you know, waiting to see this movie at midnight. I mean, it felt like everybody loved it. I didn't find out that the fan base as a whole hated it until a decade later. And I think that's just when the few loud people got Facebook and started telling everybody else you either hate it or you're a bad Star Wars fan, right? And so, to answer your question, no, I don't remember it having the hate that it's saddled with now, back when it was actually coming out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to put it simply, I do. I mean, there was a documentary that came out called "The People versus George Lucas," and that was, I think, the late 2000s, if not early. It was before the Disney buyout. It was well before the Disney buyout, but and featured a song that went semi-viral called "George Lucas Raped My Childhood."
Jeez.
Anti-prequels, and it was a whole documentary of people just trashing George Lucas. And what's really interesting is, and you know, maybe it could be what Lance was saying, that then the sequels come out and people are like, well, this is different. But now, so George gave an interview when he was promoting a movie called Red Tails that came out in
2008,
early
2009, I think.
I think it was more like 2011 because it was close. It was within a year of the Disney buyout. But George was asked, are you going to make episode 7? And he said, why? Why would I make another movie for the entire internet to tell me what a bad person I am and how bad I am at telling my story? So, no, there is no episode 7. Cut to about a year later, and we all see in bold print, Disney buys Lucasfilm, plans to release episode 7 in 2015, and I freak out and shed my skin and run around just trying to make sense of my existence. But I do remember the reactions to the prequels. I remember listening to talk radio with my dad when we would be driving back and forth to like jiu-jitsu and stuff, and Star Wars would come up all the time, and nobody liked it. Nobody liked the prequels. When you'd go see the midnight showings, like we did, there were a bunch of people. But I don't remember having a single conversation with basically anybody until episode 3. I don't remember having a conversation with anybody that liked the prequels. Like, Lance and I both knew Ian Scher, and he kind of liked the prequels because they were more Star Wars, and he would take anything. Shout out Ian Scher if you're listening.
Grammy Award winning Ian Scher.
Grammy Award winning, that's right. Our buddy from as far back as middle school. But I don't remember anybody liking them. And then I remember, cut to middle of COVID quarantine, and I didn't have anything to do other than play D&D on like Zoom and stuff. And I'm sitting down for a Zoom D&D session, and there was a guy that I think he was early 20s, if not late teens. Star Wars gets brought up, as happens when you're with nerds, and he's like, oh, and I mean, by the way, Revenge of the Sith is the best one by far. And I just kind of looked at him, and it was the first time that in the wild I had encountered that sentiment, and I was like, what? Why? Where does this? And now everybody you talk to says that the prequels were never hated, they were always loved, and that Star Wars didn't get bad until Disney bought it. And I'm like, I kind of don't. That I'm going to be real. That is revisionist history. Yeah. If people tell you that, they are lying. There were absolutely fans, but like Katie Lucas, George's daughter, who wrote all the Night Sister stuff on the Clone Wars, has like deleted her Twitter eventually and all social media because all it was Star Wars fans trashing her for what her dad did with the prequels. And she now operates, she still works, she's an editor and a writer, but I think she goes by Katie Rose now or something. Doesn't even go by her name. to avoid prequel hate.
Wow.
But then now, and it could be the grass is greener on the other side. Now that we have the Disney stuff, the prequels are that much better, I guess. Could be in some people's minds. I also just think it's time, because I'm gonna, as we this kind of ties into our next thing, but I'm gonna tell you right now, I think, as wild as it may seem to some of us, or to a lot of people online, I think in about 10 years, we're going to start to hear people say that, like, The Rise of Skywalker is the best Star Wars movie, or The Force Awakens is the best Star Wars movie. And the three of us that have been around for, by that point, will have been a good long while, we're going to be going, what are you talking about? Now, what's different is we're going to have receipts of all the hate that the sequels got and stuff, because we have social media. But I honestly do believe, being the nerd that I've always been and being on message boards and whatever else, because that was what you had to do to interact with other Star Wars fans at the time, I think that the prequels were just as hated as the sequels are now. And, who knows? Maybe the Mandoverse one day will be talking about how that helped out the prequels. But do y'all have any other final thoughts on all of that before we move on to the last section of our episode?
The tides of time smooth all rocks,
It's very profound, especially with the beard and the hair. Really, that's the whole effect.
Hey, 10 years from now we'll be like, yeah, no, the sequels are great. I agree. I think that'll happen. But
well, I just watched the sequels this last week, like I said, a little while ago, and they're not bad. I mean, really, even I watched The Last Jedi. I was ready. I have not watched The Last Jedi in years just because of everything that you hear. And I watched it again. It's not bad. Yeah. But the problem is Star Wars is supposed to be the best. Mm-hmm. Everything they put on the screen should be the best thing you've ever seen, right? I mean, that's the way you respect a franchise like that.
Yeah.
And it's not the best that I've ever seen. But there's a lot of parts of it that are really, really good. Mm-hmm. The characters are really, really good. I mean, everybody that got introduced in The Force Awakens is great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that maybe there's some salvation for Disney Star Wars in the future.
Well, and go ahead.
I thought that would be a good segue into Lance's mailbag question.
Yes. So our second mailbag of the podcast, because and I thought the question was so good, I decided to drag Lance onto the show to talk about it on here. So first off, I want to give Lance credit. He opened this email with "chut chut, guys," and I was like, "That's a good Star Wars pull." I was like, "What?"
Chut chut, Watto. That's one of my favorite lines that Hayden gives. There's so much sass to it.
Chut chut, Watto. And I'll sum up, but basically, I love this quote from Lance: "The worst Star Wars made is still better than anything else." Or still better than the best anything else, including Lord of the Rings. We're going to get hate for that.
I had Lord of the Rings in mind when I wrote that, yeah.
This is going to make so many people mad.
This is a Lord of the Rings hate podcast now, and I will not be a part of it.
We'll talk. We'll have a Lord of the Rings episode. We'll have a not a Star Wars episode, and we'll talk about Lord of the Rings. But anyway, Lance's actual question. Star Wars is a very unique and difficult to define narrative aesthetic. Many of the more recent releases just don't feel right. Can you help define what it is that makes Star Wars, and why the mark is so often missed? So we do hear this a lot, especially in the last couple of years. I do want to unpack it. A lot of people online and in my personal life not vibing with a lot of the recent stuff. So let's start with Zach. What do you think makes Star Wars? What do you think makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars?
I think it comes down to influences. I think when Star Wars is best when it gets back to its influence roots, as like a theme to like make it feel Star Wars. Like Mandalorian is a Western. and like as soon as they were like, hey, we're gonna lean into this Western vibe, it felt more Star Wars than, say, the sequels. Like A New Hope is heavily influenced by so many different cultures, so I think it's when you lean into one of those cultures that you get that feel, because you get back to the original influences in George's mind. I mean, at one point he was like, the rebels are Viet Cong, like which bold statement, George, like,
that went over great in the 70s.
yeah, right.
Sure, yeah.
And so it's like I think when you lean into those influences, or what influences you as an artist, and really try and go very specific in referencing different cultures and different like themes and thematics of the original trilogy, that's when you get Star Wars. And the other thing that I think makes Star Wars feel Star Wars is practical effects. And we talked about it last week, like crunchy. Like the universe needs to feel real. It needs to have texture. It needs to feel like you could reach out and touch it, because the original trilogy did that. I mean, the Wampa, like he was fur. He was a shag carpet. Like when you felt that, you're like, when you were like at your grandma's house with a shag carpet, you're like, oh, that's like a Wampa, like, or like, oh, that's like a Wookiee, like it's tactile. It's stuff that you in your mind can be like, oh, that's alien, but I know what it is. That's a Wolfman. I know what that costume is. I can buy it down the street at Walgreens. Like it's that tactile and influenced driven storytelling.
Right on.
That's for me.
Lance. Yeah. So, Lance, to put you on the spot, I suppose, what do you think makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars?
Oh, I'll start off by saying, if I knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't have asked the two guys that know the most about Star Wars that I know. I do not have the film background, the storytelling background that you guys have. So I'm looking at it as from kind of an outside perspective. The number one thing I could put my finger on is that they stopped having real good guys and real bad guys, and they started making both sides morally convoluted. The second that they said, and we'll bring up the Acolyte a little bit, but the second that they said that the Jedi is this big flawed, sometimes good, sometimes bad unit, and then we're going to provide sympathy for the Sith on the other side. So they're really equals. They're really these two dogmatic religious cults that are fighting against each other that have nothing to do with the rest of the galaxy. And I think that's wrong. I think the Jedi, at their most flawed, are still the good guys. And are there bad Jedi? Yeah, it's like with any institution, you have individuals in there. But to say that because Mace Windu wanted to keep from the Senate the fact that they had lost connection with the Force, or actually I think it was Mace Windu that suggested that they should stop keeping that a secret. But either way, that doesn't make them bad, right? The fact that they're worried about losing a little bit of the influence in the galaxy, well, they're the good guys. They should have influence in the galaxy. If the Jedi get taken out of the equation by the Senate, we see what happens, right? I mean, everything falls to pieces. It becomes a dystopian future. So the Jedi aren't bad. They're always the good guys. And that's what really bothered me with Luke in The Last Jedi is Luke basically takes the stand that the Jedi have to die. The Jedi have never been what they were supposed to be. They're always this dogmatic gray, entity, and the Sith have to die for the same reason. And that's not true, and that's not the balance. You sent me something the other day about that, I think in a text message, but that's not the balance that everybody thinks it is, right? It's not like the universe is in balance and then you have the Jedi that's drawing it towards one side and the Sith that are drawing it towards the other side. The Jedi are operating on a direct, pure relationship with the Force, and the Sith are perverting that for their own gain. So they're the ones pulling it out of balance, right? They're the ones pulling the canoe kind of out of the current, right? And the second that you get away, make the Sith go away, the canoe rights itself and gets back into the current and goes down the river. And it's the same thing with Star Wars. But for some reason, and it's kind of this leftover postmodern moral ambiguity, moral relativism, right? Nobody's good, nobody's bad. You're only good or bad compared to something else that I think doesn't work with Star Wars. Look at Anakin, or not Anakin, Luke, baby Anakin. So Luke has this great. You made a comment earlier that Ahsoka has the best story arc as a hero, and I think that's true only because I think the sequel trilogy handles Luke oddly. But if you take that out of there and you just have 4, 5, and 6, Luke struggles with his own morality, right? What's the very first thing he does in Jedi? He walks in and Vader's the pigman, and kills him.
No, he doesn't kill him. He just incapacitates him.
Well, to be fair, we don't see. The Gamorrean guard is grabbing his neck and choking, and they cut away.
Well,
I don't think he kills him.
Either way, it's a very Sithy thing to do.
Yes.
And,
yeah, absolutely.
And he's all dressed in all black, right? And he's still a good guy, but he's really struggling with how he's going to respond to the universe after all this horrible, horrible stuff has happened. And then at the end, you see him, and he's got his lightsaber, and he's just like hacking in a rage on his own dad, right? And cuts his arm off and is going to kill him. And you see Palpatine is just giddy. This is the best thing that's ever happened to him, right? He's almost giggling in his own Sithiness. And then Luke realizes what he's doing, and he makes what is the best line in Star Wars. No, I am a Jedi like my father before me. And he throws the lightsaber down, and you see his little dark suit has opened up, right? And you see the light that's underneath it, which is fantastic symbolism.
Yeah.
But Luke struggled with his moral ambiguity, but he won over it and became the ultimate hero. And that's Star Wars. That works that way. And we get to see the opposite of that with Anakin in the prequel trilogy. That can be Star Wars too. It's a really interesting take on it. But then what are we doing with 7, 8, 9? What are we doing with Kylo? Kylo was such a really interesting beginning to a character, and he kind of, they lean in The Last Jedi, they lean into him being evil.
Yeah.
Completely, like, irredeemably evil. And then in 9, they're going to try to pull that back and do a 180 and say, no, he's good, and he gets the girl at the end.
Yeah.
And then, Rey is good, and that's nice. But you don't see a lot of people that complain about Rey, other than the fact that she's good at everything, but that doesn't really bother me either. But there are no really good or bad people in Disney era Star Wars, other than Palpatine when he comes back.
Right on. So, yeah, okay. I like this. So, and I'm going to respond before I give my thoughts.
This is terrifying. Okay, go ahead.
Oh,
respond.
no. Well, the first thing I was going to say was, so I think it's worth pointing out that the first thing that kind of both of y'all brought up, or the biggest thing that y'all brought up, they are both things that not exclusively, but kind of mostly apply to the original trilogy, which is the Star Wars y'all saw when y'all were youngest. You know what I mean? Not to say that you're wrong for thinking that, but I think that to an individual, what they see Star Wars as, more than likely, it's going to be what they saw when their ideas were most open, when their minds were most open to just take in what it is, not what they wish it was. That's what I struggle with on every new Star Wars thing. I'm not watching a new episode of The Acolyte when an episode of The Acolyte comes out. I'm watching and constantly having to go against my own mind of Wait, well, how does that apply to episode 7 of Rebels? Wait, but how does that connect to... But wait a minute, that pushes back again... Because we've been in the bag for this for a long time. A 7-year-old watches The Acolyte and is like, oh, okay. Well, is what it is. And then they go back to playing with Legos. And I'm not saying that, Lance, you're wrong for any of the things that you're saying. And that is not what I'm trying to communicate at all. But I think that the first thing that... It's why I think the sequels are eventually going to be revered. Because to 8-year-olds, they don't have a Luke Skywalker other than Sad Man on The Last Jedi Island. They have Rey. You know what I mean? And Rey will inform every Star Wars hero moving forward. Because that was their first. But I think that, to me, just quickly, what makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars is that it's science fantasy, not science fiction. What makes it feel like Star Wars is when the pacing is faster, more intense. When the characters and the music have their emotions on their sleeves. You don't really necessarily have to interpret what's going on. You know what's going on because the storytelling is that clear. I will give you, I've said it about The Acolyte, that is something that bugged me in that while they were open about how they were going to tell a story from the Sith's perspective, which means it is going to be a little more morally complicated, they had to kind of intentionally make things ambiguous. And to me, Star Wars is at its best when it is clear what is going on. Like you watch The Binary Sunset. If it was the prequels, George would probably have given Luke a whole monologue about how much he wants to be. I just want to go to the wars in the stars. Maybe not that on the nose, but you know what I mean? But it wasn't. It was he's going to have him stand on the top of the hill in his backyard and look up at the sky and wish he was anywhere other than where he is. The biggest problem that Star Wars has in general is also its greatest strength in that it is so universal. Everybody is going to see different things in it, and everybody's right. Sam Witwer had a quitwer. Sam Witwer had a quitwer?
Sam Witwer had a
Good
quitwer.
God.
I was going to say, is it the beginning of a limerick, or what are we doing here?
Sam Witwer had a quitwer, and whatever. Anyway, that's going to come back to me in a bad way. So Sam Witwer had a quote from something. I'm never not taken in this stuff, and I really should do a better job of saying where it came from. But leading up to episode 7, he was like, the problem is everybody understands this Star Wars, and they're all right. Some people look at it and they see, 1940s Flash Gordon serials, and they're right, that's in there. Some see the Iliad, and they're right, that's in there. Some see, philosophy, and the Hero of a Thousand Faces, and they're right, that's in there. George has talked about, of course, that he pulled from Akira Kurosawa. He also very transparently pulled from Dune. He also pulled from Wizard of Oz. He cast a wide net and put all this stuff in it while making it feel very, very universal. But the first time that Star Wars bumped people was not the prequels or even the sequels. It was The Empire Strikes Back. I can't remember what it's called right now, but there's a Star Wars fan magazine that shut down when The Empire Strikes Back came out. Because they were like, what is this? This is like sad and depressing. And Star Wars is family films. This is dumb. They've lost it. Charles Lippincott, one of the producers of A New Hope, said that Star Wars lost its way with The Empire Strikes Back. It was like, as soon as you brought in a Muppet, you lost what it was. Like, what is this? Now, I do think I agree, Lance, with kind of your biggest thing of the moral graying. The risk that you run with a story like that, to me, is that you lose the point of a myth, right? To me, a mythology is we're going to sit around the campfire, we're going to tell the kids a story that has a moral that you can learn from. Ultimately, to me, The Acolyte points to what happens when, number one, you don't tell, when you lie to someone for 16 years, you never give her her own choices, you've created a problem. And I don't think the show glorifies her for that. I think you're supposed to watch her holding hands with the stranger at the end of the show with Darth Plagueis creeping in the cave and going, ugh, a lot of bad stuff has happened. This is bad. I feel complicated about this. Now, if they do make a season 2 and it turns out that like it's just like heroic music as she's slaughtering Jedi, then I'll be like, oh, okay. I think they might have jumped the shark on this one. I don't know. Maybe at least the fight choreo is cool, and I'll look forward to talking about it. But I think that when you make it morally ambiguous, you make the point of the story up for debate. I will also say it's a fun thing. Lance, you literally said it before I did. We'll have a Last Jedi review eventually, but to me, Luke Skywalker is my favorite character, kind of with the exception of The Last Jedi. And that's kind of what makes Ahsoka my favorite. I will say, it is important to note, though, he ends The Last Jedi himself again.
Yeah.
He has gone back to, and I will not be the Last Jedi. Like, they're coming back. It's one of, for all my quibbles about that movie, it's one of my favorite scenes in the saga of Yoda and Luke watching the Jedi Order burn down again.
See you around, kid.
Talking about how... oh no! Well, I bump up against.
Oh,
that
I love it!
lot.
I love that moment.
I missed it.
Well,
What'd
it's a
you
whole
say?
other.
See you around,
See
kid.
you around, kid.
When
Oh yeah.
when he just
I-
forces out, and he's like, ah.
Yeah.
But part of why Luke, I still struggle with him. If Luke Skywalker, the same guy that redeemed Darth Vader, who did nothing but try to murder him and his friends for 3 movies. If Luke Skywalker believes he failed Ben Solo, why is he trash-talking him in his last time to talk to him? I bump up against that in a big way. That's like an action hero line and not a Luke Skywalker line of, I am why you are like this and I'm sorry. Just to go, see you around, kid. And then like, haha, bye. It doesn't really make any sense to me at all.
I think the plan was originally to have him come back and haunt Ben as a Force ghost, and
Sure.
then it would have been amazing. You know, be like, hey, I'm back.
Sure.
I said see you around. Why are you doing this?
Well, and
That's the TV show I want to see.
Right.
Just unrelentlessly haunting him, just following him from room to room.
Why are you doing that?
well, and the consistency.
Your mom wouldn't like that. Why are you doing that? Man, you are
I'm not
evil.
touching you. I'm not touching you.
Well, and the consistencies of the sequels are that's the biggest thing, more than anything. I think everybody knows. That's the biggest problem that they have. Like, love the original trilogy, dislike the original trilogy, it is consistent. Love the prequels, dislike the prequels. They're consistent. The sequels, it's obvious. They didn't have a plan. And they didn't have a plan for the other 2 trilogies either, but they had the same guy, same plaid-wearing, bearded dude, making a lot of the main decisions. And but Lance, thank you for the question. If that's not obvious, I hope it didn't come off like I was trying to dunk on you. That was not what I was trying to do.
I don't think.
But this is
The future will tell. But we'll look in the comments to see how people feel. But yeah.
I think
No,
I
and
think a lot of what
like I said when I
didn't get to respond to you, Lance. I think a lot of what you said is very true. You know, I think Star Wars is for kids. I've said it before. It is for kids that everyone can enjoy, and the grayness I think is a effort to try and make it not for kids. You know, trying to like age it up too much. But I think maybe that's why you're feeling the way you feel. Like maybe it's them being like, oh, like yeah, like we're gonna make the Acolyte for like 35-year-olds, you know, 30-year-olds, you know, and then you watch and you're like, wait, this is not the Star Wars that I grew up with, because it's not, you know, like it's not, I guess it's not for kids, but it should be aimed at kids for them to watch and understand. And maybe that's where it's losing its way, is it's losing the morals and the oh my gosh, sorry, my screen just went blank. You're missing the morals and the storytelling that is more transparent.
Absolutely.
Well, Lance, you were about to say
Yeah,
something.
sorry, I didn't mean to
remember.
cut you off.
Oh no, you're fine. So what I was gonna say is just what I said from the beginning. Is I don't really know. I've had a horrible time trying to put my finger on what it is that works and what it is that doesn't work. And it's this, and some of it is that I just don't have the education or the training for it. But you know, a lot of these people that are making it when it is not working have the education and the training, right? I mean, so it's just kind of this like hiding in the corners secret formula for Star Wars, and I don't know how much of that is what's on the screen and how much of that is what I'm bringing to my viewing experience. But it really bothers me when there is a bad Jedi, and so the response to that is the Jedi are bad.
Yeah.
And I think that concept has been haunting, bring back the word, haunting Disney era Star Wars for a long time now. And even outside of the story, you can say, okay, well, that episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi was bad, and so Obi-Wan Kenobi is bad. That scene from that episode of The Acolyte, that line is bad, and so that show is bad.
Yeah.
You know, they can't view something without letting it be poisoned. It has to be absolute perfection from beginning to end. And if you take those rules and apply them to anything, I mean, Luke kissed his sister. You can't apply those rules to anything in the Star Wars universe or out of the Star Wars universe and have it hold up.
Yeah.
So let's be a little forgiving with the way we
view our Star Wars. Yeah.
Well, and I don't mean to sound like I've loved all of the everything Star Wars. It's still my favorite franchise, but it's got its blemishes for me, for sure. But it's part of why I finally texted Zach, and I was like, hey, man, we've been talking about this for forever. We're having a podcast. Yeah. Was that I wanted to be able to talk about these things. And the episode that came out over the weekend, or the last episode, was Kai bringing, our first guest, bringing a really, really totally different perspective to me and the Acolyte. And I started to see things that I wasn't seeing before, and I was like, okay, cool. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that makes Star Wars work the best is George Lucas's quote about it being purely about being selfless and not selfish. That is the whole thing. And if you have that and you couple it with silly monsters, pacing, characters going through things we can relate to, I think if you do that, it's going to work. Probably, you know, the biggest thing that I hadn't really thought about for the Acolyte before when we just brought it up, it is not necessarily a show that I think a kid would watch. Mm-hmm. It's almost too specific in a way. Whereas, like, you watch The Mandalorian, and The Mandalorian is so universal and simplistic. He is a gunslinger that finds out he has a heart of gold because of this kid that he has feelings for. You know what I mean? That's it. And as long as they stick to that, it probably works. So I guess after saying Star Wars is what you want it to be, I do think when it is simplified and focused and like archetypal, it works. What were you going to say?
Just a disclaimer as well, in case people don't know. We do want the Acolyte to be renewed. We are fans.
Oh, absolutely.
And it does bring conversation to the universe, just so that we're not, so somebody doesn't watch this clip and go, oh, they hate the Acolyte, you know?
No, I loved it. So I was just having a conversation with a casual Star Wars fan last week who is a movies only Star Wars fan. Will not watch TV shows. All right, fine. However you do it is fine. But this guy has a Star Wars T-shirt on like every day, and so I always want to talk Star Wars with him. I finally had the opportunity, and so we were talking about the Acolyte, and he said, "Okay," he said, "I'm never going to watch that show. What is that show?
Yeah.
Just what is the plot line of it? Just tell me what that show is. Just spoiler it." So I said, "Okay." So in 30 minutes, I told him the plot of season 1, and he said, "That sounds awesome." I said, "It does sound awesome, doesn't it?" Like it really is a great idea for a story. And I think that the things that didn't work aren't enough to keep it from being a great show, really.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I've got a quote here from the guy that directed my most favorite and least favorite Disney Star Wars movie. I know that we don't necessarily talk about ranking these things, but for me, J.J. Abrams fits. He's the only guy that's directed to, but he fits both of those. So somebody, I think this came from Variety, but this was leading up to Rise of Skywalker. And this guy asked JJ what he would say to those who are unhappy with the last couple films. He says, are those fans not getting something? And or is there a problem in the fandom? And JJ said, no. I would say that they're right. And then he went on to say, the people who love it more than anything are also right. So how do you go about pleasing everybody? And JJ said, I was like, what? Not to say that that's what anyone should try to do anyway, but how would one go about it, especially with Star Wars? I really I appreciate the humility to be like, hey, if they don't like your movie, how do they feel about it? He goes, I mean, they're right. They're also right if they liked it. I don't know. I just made a funny movie about space wizards. I do think, I mean, real talk, it's a simple answer. What makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars? George Lucas. You know, it's part of why Clone Wars is peak for me, to steal a quote from kids, is that George Lucas was the idea man, right?
Yeah.
And then Dave Filoni is the actual executor of it. It's all over his movies. George struggles with dialogue. But as far as ideas, that guy is the best. And you know, maybe one day if enough people continue to be positive about him, he'll come back. And then I hope they welcome him with open arms. I also don't think he's the Messiah. I just think that that
Praise the maker.
Boundless creativity. Praise the maker. That boundless creativity that he has of just Anakin as a Padawan. I don't care. We're doing this. We're gonna figure it out later. It works. So anyway, well, I think we did it. We figured out what makes Star Wars Star Wars.
Excellent.
No, Lance, seriously, thank you for that question. I read that. I was like, this is cool, and this is timely, and this
I
is
read it,
important.
and I think I read it first, and I was like, Matt, we have to do a whole episode on this. Like,
yeah, because I was like, bro, I don't know. Let's talk about this. Let's try and figure it out.
Well, and thank you guys for doing this show.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I know it's a lot of effort and it's a lot of work, and I know y'all are both increasingly busy people. But I think it means a lot to the fandom to have a positive place to discuss Star Wars. I listen to a lot of Star Wars podcasts. It is not a positive place right now. And so that's what really drew me to this, other than the fact that, I mean, you could make a podcast about ketchup and I'd probably listen to it, but
that's another Patreon stretch goal.
Yeah, there you go. When I made it through listening to the first episode, I felt like there was hope for the franchise. I felt like everything was still good and it's okay to like it. It doesn't make you stupid if you like Star Wars. So I really appreciate y'all's efforts in that.
Thanks, Lance.
Thanks, man. Thanks for coming on the show. You've been my friend longer than probably anybody else on the planet, and somehow we're still friends, even though we've known each other for like 30 years.
Yeah, despite each other, we're still friends.
Yeah. Yeah, can't say for our tasted people, but we are still friends. So, no, seriously, thanks for coming on the show, and that is my goal. The only comments we really get on TikTok and our shorts right now is, you guys are dumb for liking The Last Jedi. It's trash. And it's like, well, okay, but everybody is welcome on this show, and my goal is to talk about these things in a positive way, whether we liked them or not. I would love, and I'm hoping, that Skeleton Crew just home runs it, just house calls it. Because I do also think that as a fandom, we need to be honest, I think that Disney needs a home run right now. Not to be too negative, but that with all the bad press and hate sells. So this podcast, I would love for us I want to be a home for positive conversation, and I want to get big enough to be a home for positive conversation for lots of people, but hate sells. So if you liked listening to us today or watching us or whatever, just show this to a friend. Show this to, like Lance said, someone that has or has not watched Star Wars. If they haven't watched any Star Wars, this might be really boring and they might have no idea what we're talking about. But show it to your friend that hasn't quite decided. Yeah. And show it to somebody that hates Disney Star Wars. And I hope that we just are talking about it, kind of like Lance said, might give them some hope. Or maybe show them some things that they like that they hadn't seen. Zach, did you have anything else to say?
I think that's a good way to end it. So
cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Lance, and for everybody at home.
Wait, hold on.
Lance,
remember, do you want people to find you, or do you want them to interact with you on the internet? If so, you can drop your things.
Yeah, you can't hurt my feelings. If you didn't like it, bring it on. But I am largely on the Facebook because I am relatively old, and so you can just find me by my name, Lance Candler. That's Candler like candle with an R.
Yeah. Or in the comments of this video and or podcast. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I forgot. Zach, tell them where they can find you.
Satisfaction. If you listen to this, you know. At ZACHISFACTION. FACTION. Satisfaction, like satisfaction with the Zach. Okay, I've talked enough.
Found it out.
Matt.
Right on. Yeah, you can find me at Matt Beutner on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And on Instagram. You can also find me on Facebook, but I will not respond to you. That sounds meaner than I meant it, but you know what I'm saying. Talk to us on Instagram. Share the podcast. Let everybody know that it's awesome. If you have questions, send them to forceofothersradio@gmail.com. And if it's good enough, we'll have you on the show like Lance was. But we hope you enjoyed this conversation, and until next week, and remember, the force of others will be with you.
Always. I'm going to do it every time. The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast.